We're a week out from training camp, and one of the Colts' biggest stars is a little disgruntled with the treatment of his position around the league. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am Jake Arthur. He is Zach Hicks, and you know the two of us from horseshoehuddle.com. I'm your regular credentialed media member from the site, bringing you the inside scoopage from the facility, from training camp coming up and all that. And Zach is the meanest, greenest film guy in the business. How was that one? That one wasn't bad.
That wasn't too bad. I mean, I'll take mean over grimy.
Yeah. I'm telling you, search up grimy in any of the young folks, maybe Urban Dictionary, but I'm going to preface that with, I don't know what that's going to bring.
I'm going to say, I'm not going back to Urban Dictionary. I haven't been to Urban Dictionary since middle school, when I thought it was funny just to look up my name and see some of the most grotesque things ever associated with my name. So I think we're good with Urban Dictionary, Jake.
Yeah. Anyways, on today's show, we're going to kind of bring up something that's going to be more of, it's something all-encompassing of something we've discussed in certain segments recently, the last month or so. Jonathan Taylor and the running back market across the league, his stance with the team, his stance with his contract situation, everything. We're going to wrap that up into one episode. And, you know, we're a week away from training camp now, so there's probably not going to be any development until then, when he either shows up or he doesn't. As far as I know, the expectation is that he'll be there, but we'll see. But basically today we're going to go over, you know, the latest on the running back market across the league. Yesterday was the deadline, or Monday was the deadline for franchise tag signings. And, you know, you've got Jonathan Taylor and every other big running back across the league, their reaction to all of it. And then why exactly Jonathan Taylor's situation with the Colts isn't necessarily built like every other team's, and the Colts really ought to pay attention to that. So we'll go ahead and dive in. There were 3 franchise tag running backs this offseason, and none of them reached a long-term contract as of the deadline this week. That's Josh Jacobs from the Raiders, who led the whole league in rushing. You've got Tony Pollard, and then who is the third one? That escapes me.
Saquon Barkley.
Saquon Barkley. Okay. So, yeah, Saquon plays out of his mind, has, you know, the best season of his career, at least since his rookie year. He's dealt with some injuries. It was kind of a prove-it year for him, and he pretty much carried the Giants to the playoffs. These guys are just really premier players at their position. They were obviously franchise tagged for a reason, but no deal was done. And Jonathan Taylor came out after the deadline and simply tweeted, "Wow, you know, he's a guy who has always kind of kept to himself and kind of towed the company line when it comes to making statements about things. But for the first time, we're really hearing him voice his opinion on what running backs feel is mistreatment of the position across the league." And then, you know, there was a tweet that came out from ESPN's Matt Miller as well later, basically saying, you know, draft a running back, play them through their contract. If they're good, franchise tag them once for a year, and then draft their replacement, which is basically use them, abuse them, and lose them, is in a nutshell. And then, of course, that rubbed every running back the wrong way, as it probably should have, Jonathan Taylor among them. And he basically said, you know, you pour your heart out for your team, and then when it comes time to reward you, it doesn't matter because you're a running back. Paraphrasing right there. So Zach, what do you make of this whole thing? Because I mean, growing up, running back was pretty much one of the premier positions everyone wanted to at least watch. You know, you think of all these major players throughout the history of the game, and now they're really just being kind of cast away.
Well, growing up for you, Jake, I grew up in the Peyton Manning and Tom Brady eras, man. So like
LaDainian Tomlinson, Adrian Peterson.
I guess. But no, to bring it back to this conversation, you know, like there's 2 ways to approach this. And in this first segment, I'm going to approach it from the team perspective. So everything I'm going to say here is not exactly what I view it as, but this is kind of how teams are viewing it. Is these are very, very depreciating assets. This is one of the few positions in the entire league where they're really only prominent during their rookie contract and maybe like a year or two afterwards. And then they start to hit that peak. And once they hit that, it's just like free fall. It's a free fall into injuries, it's a free fall into lack of production and lack of consistency. And then you see a lot of running backs become reserve players or flat out of the league by the time they hit 30 years old. It's really the only position where we see something like this happen. We talked about Grover Stewart a couple weeks ago that with nose tackles, they hit their peak around 30 years old. And that's where they start playing their best football. But with running backs, that's where they're out of the league. And I think when it comes to, asset consolidation in the NFL, NFL teams have seen the contracts in the past pretty much all not work out. Zeke Elliott is obviously one of the biggest examples of that, this recent contract with the Dallas Cowboys. Todd Gurley was basically run out of the league by the time his big contract started, with all of his knee injuries. There was obviously a Le'Veon Bell holdout, which led to nothing great for him. He bounced around the league after that. And then there's a lot of other big contracts in there too. Dalvin Cook just didn't finish his, and he's still a free agent right now. And this is a player as of, 2-3 years ago, we're talking about one of the best overall playmakers in all of football. So, the running back conversation really is around that position, what it adds to the offense and what value it adds in a very passing heavy league. But also it's hard to extend these players and give them that career security when it's almost always going to come back to bite you. As if you're looking at it purely from an asset management perspective, and as a team that just doesn't want to have bad contracts on the books that limit them with their spending power in the future, running backs are almost always going to be bad contracts on the books because you can get pretty good production from someone on their rookie deal because that's when running backs are in their peak. You're basically drafting this position at its peak. So when it comes to paying them, you're paying them after they're on the decline or after they're going over the edge. And I'm not saying this is true for all running backs. Christian McCaffrey is getting paid a ton of money, and he was really, really productive last year for the 49ers and the Panthers. Derrick Henry is obviously superhuman in how he fights through injuries and is still one of the best running backs in football. So this isn't, a thing that applies to every single running back. Nick Chubb is another one, getting paid $12 million a year and easily the best running back in the league for my money. Like, it doesn't apply to all running backs, but at the end of the day, there's so many bad examples of contracts just not aging well and teams having to sacrifice assets because of this running back contract that teams are wary and teams are scared. And it's not even a thing where you can call collusion on it because collusion is like a widespread effort to drive prices down just because you don't want to pay the premium prices. But with running back, it's more of a widespread effort and widespread awareness to be like, we don't want to pay that price, we don't want to pay that price. And I think that plays into the whole thing where people are like, oh yeah, just trade Jonathan Taylor. It's like, if nobody's going to pay these running backs, who's going to take them? You can't just trade them to someone where everyone agrees with your philosophy. You have to find some sucker in your philosophy to take on that contract. But right now with the NFL, there's really not many of them. The biggest free agent signing was Miles Sanders, and his contract, if you take out if you only look at the guaranteed money, is like what, $5 million a year, $6 million a year. The franchise tags obviously are just the 1 year commitments, only around $10 million a year. Those contracts are one of the few ones that hasn't risen since 2018, where almost every other contract's franchise tag has gone up. So, people around the NFL with the rise of analytics and the rise of what's important and what's valuable, along with seeing past contracts falling off, teams are scared of that asset that is a running back. And it's crazy. Like you said, we grew up with LaDainian Tomlinson, grew up with Adrian Peterson. If you go back further than that, in the 90s, Barry Sanders and Emmitt Smith were the faces of the league. Those are the faces of the league for an entire decade. And obviously you can go before that. So it really is I don't want to say it's a dying position, but it's a position that's in peril right now. And we don't really have a solution for it. It's just all we can really do is look at it from NFL teams' perspectives and say, look, they're scared of committing big money to an asset that's probably not going to help them long term when they can draft someone who's already in their peak out of college. So it's tough. I mean, from a business standpoint, I get what NFL teams are doing, even though what we're going to get to here in the second segment, from the human perspective, it really sucks. It really sucks. It's just the gross part of, and I don't even want to say gross part. It's the unfortunate part of the NFL and unfortunate part of just business in general.
Yeah, it really is. And we'll get into it soon because I mean these are people you're drafting and developing, at the end of the day. So we'll touch on that here in a moment. But first, before we talk about the human aspect, let's talk about our friends over at FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting on the MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right, just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 that you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under, who you think is going to get struck out, who you think is going to be out there hitting dingers, whatever. It's all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no red tape. You just get the money back that you actually earned and invested in. It's really that simple. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball.
And my beautiful everyday buddies, Jake Arthur is about to enter his prime part of the offseason. We're about to enter the flu game Jake Arthur season when it comes to his coverage, because he's going to be boots on the ground at Colts training camp, and we're going to have all the inside information here on Locked On Colts. So all you wonderful everydayers, set your alarms bright and early every day, going back to 5 episodes a week, because we're going to have to, give Jake all of the airtime that he needs.
It's hot outside, so I will look like I have the flu at all times.
Yep,
it gets hot out there at Grand Park, my man. It's no joke.
All right, guys. So we're going to jump into the human side of this thing. Because, I basically at the very end of that first segment was like, yeah, these running backs are assets. Yeah, yada, yada. From a business perspective, you can't pay them. But at the end of the day, we're not talking about numbers on the spreadsheet. We're not talking about just data points in a computer or anything like that. We're talking about human beings. And I think the toughest aspect of this entire conversation, which kind of leans into what Derrick Henry and what Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler and Jonathan Taylor and all those running backs were talking about on social media the other day, especially with Jonathan Taylor's tweet. His was kind of exactly what I'm about to go into here is, when you are running an organization or running a business and you're standing in front of all your employees or all your 53 players that are on the roster, you want each of them to believe you go out there, you perform your best, you help us win, you do some great things on the football field, and you will be rewarded with pay. You will be rewarded either from us or from someone else. You will get rewarded for what you're doing. If you are an extremely valuable, extremely qualified player who is going out there and performing at a high level, you will be getting paid, and with these running backs, what they're kind of seeing is it doesn't matter if you're a multiple-time first-team All-Pro. It doesn't matter if you're leading the NFL in rushing yards. It doesn't matter if you are doing whatever, if you're whatever you are, if you're a running back, you're not really getting that second contract anymore, or you're getting driven down, or you're just getting stuck on that franchise tag without the long-term security. So it's basically like you're kind of telling all these people like, hey, you go out there, work hard, you're going to earn your money, except these couple positions that we don't value for our business, and again, it kind of is where you have to lump in the business and the human aspect, but that's a kind of demoralizing thing to tell people at these certain non-premium positions,
Yeah, it absolutely is. Cause I mean, it seems like it almost makes it seem like running backs don't matter, which of course is like the moniker of the whole argument that has been going on for years.
Right.
But like you look at it, and some of these guys are like the straw that stirs the whole drink, and so you're just saying we're going to use you for 4 years. We'll franchise tag you for 1, which really the franchise tag is to buy time for a long-term deal. Like that's misuse of it, just buying 1 more year necessarily. But yeah, like you said, I think it sends the wrong message to the locker room. Especially, the Colts aren't alone. There are other teams that kind of throw positional value out the window and they reward, non-pillar positions with big contracts. And so my thought on it, and I'm curious what you think, do you think there is some middle ground where maybe you get like an incentive laden contract essentially, or, maybe it's front loaded where you're more comfortable getting these guys their money within the first year or 2 of the deal, if you're signing them to 3-4 years, whatever. But, incentives for playing time, for productivity, like things for teams to save themselves from getting tied into these big messy contracts, because the Zeke one is probably the most recent. The Zeke and Todd Gurley are the two ugliest ones in recent memory. A way that teams can get out of that, but also this player who has, touched the ball 400 times for you for 4 years, they get rewarded as well, because it's really not right to just use them and lose them, basically. Like, there's got to be some mutual ground.
Well, I mean, now we're getting into business ethics on the podcast, Jake, because again,
it's my specialty.
At the end of the day, morality is great, and it's great to lean into the morale of your team. But at the end of the day, if you're looking at this from the business perspective, again, me reverting back to my first segment version of myself here, you're getting, say with Jonathan Taylor, you're getting multiple Pro Bowl caliber seasons or all pro seasons. And from years 1 through 5, you're paying him, if you franchise tag him in the 5th year, what, $12 million, $13, $14 million total, right? From a business perspective, total is all you're paying him for those years, less than what, $3 million a year for that type of production. And then theoretically, you just draft a replacement that can do a similar type thing. Now, again, you want to reward that, but like, what's my incentive to really renegotiate that? From a business perspective or from a team perspective, I want to have as much cap space as possible. I want to have the most flexibility to run my business the way that I want, or run my team the way I want. So like with the CBA not expiring until I think 2030, with really no reason for these owners and teams to really renegotiate that, like, I don't see a change coming to that anytime soon, which again, it's a tough conversation, because you want to have that human aspect. You want to be like what the Colts always say they are, which is rewarding high level play. Regardless of what position you are, we're going to pay our stars that we are, growing up in our organization. But that's just not always the case when it comes to a business. So yeah, I mean, I just don't see the incentive from teams to try to renegotiate that when it's already working out really well for them right now. They kind of are in a good place that benefits themselves, even if it's shafting all these running backs around the league and really lowering their value. I think, the way the market will kind of adjust itself is all these running backs will become pseudo wide receivers, in a way. The Austin Ecklers and the Christian McCaffreys are the ones that survive. Whereas, the throwback Derrick Henrys and Nick Chubbs and even Jonathan Taylors are the ones that, despite being immensely talented and would have been the best players in all of football back in the 80s and 90s, that brand of running back might die off as a result of this. But to kind of circle back on this human perspective, again, it's a tough message in the locker room. It really is. But at the end of the day, guys are going to try to get theirs, and you can be upset for your teammate, but if it means more money in your own pocket, like, it's a weird conversation to have. It's the problem with lumping wanting to make money with like the family culture that is a locker room and stuff like that. You want to see your buddy get paid, but you also want to get paid. So it's a tough conversation to have and stuff like that. But personally, I want all these guys to get paid. I do not care about ownership saving money and cap space and all that. Like, on a personal level, I think if someone earns it and they're worth that kind of money, then go make your money.
Yeah, I am a little curious, because it seems like these running backs are getting to kind of a boiling point where if they come together and decide something that they would like to do moving forward, like, it just seems like this is not the end of it. Like, I know the CBA isn't coming up for a while, like you mentioned, but like, this doesn't seem like the argument is over by any means. Like, it feels like we're hitting kind of the fever pitch of something that's kind of been coming up for almost a decade now.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious to see what's coming next, or whether it's more holdouts or refusal to play into the season, things like that. I don't know, but
yeah, it'd be interesting to see what Jacobs and Barkley do. Like, if they decide to hold out and that holdout goes into the season, but then both those teams don't really have a negative ramification for it, like they still have decent running games and stuff, like, what does that do to those two players? Like,
it kills the argument. Yeah.
Right. But not even that kills, like, say all the top running backs in the league come together and say we're holding out until this is addressed, but then the replacement backs are all fine. then what happens?
Right.
Like you just have a bunch of star
It's
players
real
sitting out,
risky. It's
and you
the
have
Le'Veon Bell thing, really.
yeah, it's an entertainment league at the end of the day. It's like, don't get me wrong, it's a sporting event, but it's an entertainment league at the end of the day where you want these big name players, even if there are running backs, big name players out there for draw. So yeah, I think I'm with you. It's it's at near a tipping point. It could go either way, but at the end of the day, all the power right now is with the organizations, and it comes down to what they're willing to give back to these running backs to change any of this, if they want to change any of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So here coming up next, we're going to talk specifically about Jonathan Taylor in Indy, his future, and why not all situations are built the same, because the Colts would probably be pretty wise to invest in a player like him. All right, Zach. So we've spent all offseason talking about, bringing Shane Steichen as the head coach. Okay, he's in. Anthony Richardson as the quarterback now. What does this offense look like? And when you think of what it could be at its peak, it almost always involves Jonathan Taylor and him, I guess, being the engine, but also getting back to how good he looked in the second half of his rookie year, 2021. Like, the offense, really what you envision it becoming, Jonathan Taylor plays a huge part of it. So, again, not all situations are created equal. So what's your temperature again on how much of an urgency the Colts should have in re-signing him?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there should be much urgency on re-signing him this offseason, because like we've kind of said, when running backs get injuries, you just never know how they're really going to react, or how they're going to ever bounce back, or if they're ever going to bounce back. So after he's coming off a big injury season that he just had, there's no rush to extend him right now. And this is me, again, purely talking from an asset management perspective. But going forward, say he comes back this year and he has a really strong season, the Colts are in a really unique situation compared to most of these teams that we talk about with running back contracts. If you look at the Vikings with Dalvin Cook, they ended up kind of releasing him because they're paying Kirk Cousins $1 jillion, like literally $1 jillion. That you can look it up. It's exactly what it is on the books. They have Justin Jefferson's contract that's going to be hitting the books. They have other big contracts. Danielle Hunter is still on the books there. Then you look over at the Cowboys, they had to choose between Zeke Elliott and Amari Cooper because of all their other big contracts they were throwing out there. And they end up losing Amari Cooper, who is an infinitely more valuable player. Now, when you look at the Indianapolis Colts, they do have a couple big contracts on the books in Braden Smith, in Quentin Nelson, and Shaquille Leonard. But outside of that, they're not really paying anybody. They're just really not, especially at the quarterback position. Going into next season, the Colts are going to have $65 million in cap space. And again, this rookie quarterback contract is going to be a huge thing for them, because it's really never going to hit that big for them until that year 5 option. And then obviously if they franchise tag or long-term extend Anthony Richardson after that. So they have a pretty decent window here where they're going to have a little bit extra cap space to play around with. And again, the big thing with this running back conversation is that I like to look at the cost benefit analysis of it. If you, again, look at it from the Cowboys perspective, your cost benefit analysis of keeping Zeke Elliott was losing Amari Cooper. That's a net negative for your team and for your offense right there. But with the Indianapolis Colts, the Colts are not a team that spends in free agency. They are a team that saves their money, hoards their money even to extend their in-house guys. So when you're looking at $64 million next year, and even if you put aside $20 million for Pittman Jr. and put aside 13 or 14 million for Grover Stewart, you're still looking at a good 30 something million dollars that the Colts really aren't going to do much with. Like they're not going out there and signing another $20 million wide receiver on the market. They're not trading for an AJ Brown caliber player. Most likely not going to trade for that. Chris Ballard does trade every now and then, but they're not going to make big moves like that. So when it comes to the Colts, it's really not like, it's not pay Jonathan Taylor versus pay Michael Pittman Jr. It's not anything like that with the Colts. It's really pay Jonathan Taylor or not pay him. Like that's the whole conversation with the Colts. So I think the Colts conversation is a bit different than it is with other teams, because they're going to have that cap space, and they're not really a team that is going to make a million moves in free agency where they need that flexibility. They're going to make their couple little moves that they always do, maybe making a Bukum level, mid-level signing, but they're not really, like, if they have cap space, they're typically just going to hoard it. So why not just have that star running back for your young athletic quarterback and benefit him the best you can? So I really don't even think the Anthony Richardson thing comes in too big with this, where it's like you need to give Richardson a star running back to make him better. I think it's just like there is no way the Colts are going to add the value that Jonathan Taylor adds to this team with how they approach free agency, just because they have that extra cap space. Like having an additional $15 million a year, whatever it's going to be, doesn't really do anything for the Colts. So you can love it or hate it. You can love or hate Chris Ballard's approach to free agency and approach to trading and all that stuff. But knowing what we know with him, the options are not Jonathan Taylor or top wide receiver on the market. The options are Jonathan Taylor or no Jonathan Taylor. Like, that's all it is. So when it comes down to that, for me personally, I'd prefer the Jonathan Taylor option. Like, I think that's a pretty easy choice. What do you think, Jake?
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're convincing themselves they have to choose, because you mentioned Grover Stewart, Michael Pittman Jr. Like, those are deals coming up, but there is enough money to go around. And it just, I would be surprised if they bungle this whole thing, because you mentioned it. It's their philosophy. They've said it from day one of the Chris Ballard regime: draft, develop, and extend your own guys. Like you said, they're not a spending happy team out on the open market. So your pool of free agents is essentially your own free agents, in which he will become one. So I would be pretty surprised if they don't do it. I think he is worth it. And I know I've probably come off like very, very pro player, pro running back in this argument. In general, I don't think just everybody needs to have, these demands met for them. I don't want to say they're a dime a dozen, but like there are some select special players that I think you should make sure that you keep in house. And I think he's one of them. Like, I don't think every running back should be re-signed and everything necessarily. But for him, we've seen what the offense can look like with him. And if you pair him with a competent passing game, then, the sky is the limit. And people kind of tried to use my own argument against me recently, because I've said, Jonathan Taylor had arguably the best season a running back has had in franchise history in 2021, and they still didn't make the playoffs. But you look at it further, like they wouldn't have even been in position to compete, because they had to hide their passing game for a huge chunk of the year. Yeah. So Jonathan Taylor was the offense for a good chunk of 2021. And I mean, he's still under 25. He's not really pushing it too much. I mean, he's coming off his first injury. Like, the guy had never even missed practices. I do understand that you have to monitor that and see what he's going to look like, because that's how his season ended. He didn't come back from that yet. So the last we saw was him with the ankle injury not playing. So I get that. I don't think there's immediate urgency, which is something you and I have talked about recently, because it probably benefits him to come out and have another awesome season and then, get that bigger payday. Because right now his arrow is a little more medium. Because again, we didn't see prime Jonathan Taylor last time we saw him. But in general, I think it would be very wise to bet on him and make sure that he stays in-house. Maybe that's just a 2 or 3 year deal. It doesn't have to be 4 or 5, because that's a little long for running backs. I would encourage a 2 or 3 year deal. But still, for him in Indy, I think that'd be a good choice.
Yeah, my closing remarks on this whole topic are this: when it comes to the Colts, the Chris Ballard era Colts, again, love it or hate it, love his philosophy. I don't care what you really think about his philosophy, because it's going to be here. Like, we can say we hate it and we disagree completely, but it's going to be here. So we kind of have to talk about what it means for the Colts going forward. And with the Colts, when it comes to skill position players, they draft. They don't sign. They draft players. Jonathan Taylor, drafted player. Zach Moss was a rare trade, but Deion Jackson, undrafted free agent signing. Jelani Woods, drafted. Kylan Granson, drafted. Mo Alley Cox, signed after the draft. Michael Pittman Jr., drafted. Alec Pierce, drafted. Josh Downs, drafted. They just draft skill position players. So really, when it comes down to paying versus not paying Jonathan Taylor, you're not going to find a skill position player in the draft that adds the value that Jonathan Taylor has. And I mean, again, unless you're adding a wide receiver, which you could do with Jonathan Taylor still. So really, your argument is, if we let Jonathan Taylor leave, like, the way that we have to replace his value on offense is by drafting someone equivalent to or better than him in the draft, which is not going to happen. So you're just making your offense worse by default because of some want to have the greatest process ever. At the end of the day, results matter too. Process is great. And I understand the process of not paying running backs, but results matter too. And you don't want to take away explosiveness and take away playmaking from your offense because you just want to have this great process for the heck of having a great process. But everydayers, this concludes our conversation on Jonathan Taylor for the time being. Obviously, we will rehash a lot of this if he does get that extension this offseason. But I think for the most part, we've kind of said everything we need to say on it. Let us know in the comment section for like the 10th time this offseason what you think on this. Should the Colts re-sign Jonathan Taylor? And if they do re-sign him, what kind of contract are you looking at for him? So let us know in the comments there every day. And if you don't already, follow at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2, all on Twitter. Also subscribe to the Locked On Colts podcast on YouTube or listen to your podcast. We love your guys' ratings and reviews, and we'll see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning.